Chapter 7. In deep space, far from any star, the Taljkan vagabond drifted in the darkness, silent and inert. Gamar Ascalon, the nearest of the cold lights woven into the eternal curtain of night, was too far away to raise more than the faintest gleam on the vagabond's gray metal skin. Trailing well behind was the much smaller black-hulled intelligence ferret IX-44F, one ghost shadowing another. The ferret was nearly as inert as its quarry. It announced itself only with periodic position updates broadcast to Coruscant by hypercom and by an optical laser pulse aimed directly aft. The laser pulse was the rendezvous target for Pakpakat's approaching armada, which had come out of hyperspace on tiptoe, one ship at a time, hundreds of thousands of clicks behind the vagabond. Following the ferret's beacon, the armada had taken days to close the gap, its slow, silent approach that of an infinitely patient predator. For most of that approach, the armada was arrayed single file on a heading that allowed the hull of the tiny ferret itself to hide the approaching ships from the vagabond. Only 2 days ago had the armada broken file and, using thrusters only, begun to spread itself out into the intercept formation. The 3 pickets that made up the interdiction screen moved the farthest out and forward. Their orders called for them to flank the vagabond on 3 sides and move ahead of it. By the time the rest of the armada caught up to the ferret, the interdiction pickets were to be in position to cut off a hyperspace escape. Spreading out almost as widely were the 3 spotter ships, 2 escorts, and the Lightning, a converted Pranawi racer, assigned to make complete visual and full-spectrum recordings of the intercept attempt. If the vagabond tried to run in real space, it was Lightning's job to run with it. Glorious, the gunship Marauder, and the pilotless ferret D-89 remained on the initial intercept heading, closing with the shadowing ferret so slowly that at times an impatient Lando thought they would never reach it. "This Pakpakat is so cautious, he makes you look impetuous, 3PO," Lando complained in the privacy of Lady Luck's main cabin. "I agree with his tactics," said Lobot. "You would," Lando said wryly. "Is it not prudent to take all pains to avoid alarming one's prey?" "We've gone far beyond prudent," Lando grumbled. "I'm beginning to suspect the Hortak hunt by boring their prey to death." But finally the hour came when all 10 ships were in position, and IX-44F and its 3-man crew were relieved from their 79-day deployment. "Captain, you are free to return to base, with our thanks," Pakpakat signaled the ferret. "I'm afraid you will have to make a stealth withdrawal from the target zone, however." "Thank you, Colonel," came the response. "A couple of days, more or less, in this closet doesn't mean much to us at this point. Good luck and good hunting." As IX-44F veered slowly off the intercept heading and fell behind, the cruiser Glorious took up its position. "What do you think is inside, General Calrissian?" asked Pakpakat as they stood together at the main bridge viewpoint. "Why is it here? Where is it going? Tell me what you're thinking." "Wherever it's going, Colonel, it's not in a hurry," Lando said easily. "Just like us, eh? Have you made a final decision on when to send in your ferret?" "I intend to establish an observation baseline before making any approach," Pakpakat said. "Have you and your staff made any progress on the signal fragment from the Raskis contact?" "Colonel, you know our hands have been tied by your blackout orders. We've had hardly any bandwidth available to us on the HoloNet. Lady Luck doesn't have the kind of data capacity you have here on Glorious. We depend more heavily than you do on access to records located elsewhere." I will take that as a report of no progress, Kube-McDowell said. With a light touch on the main viewport's controls, he increased the gain on the photo amplifiers until the outline of the vagabond sharpened, and the body of the vessel brightened enough to show the gross detail. "Look at it, General," he went on. "For all we know, it may be 500 years old, or 50,000. It may have been roaming space since both our species were too young to raise our eyes to the stars. Perhaps the only reason we can get this close is that the work of some ancient engineer has at long last begun to decay and fail." "The odds favor a shorter history," Lando said, surprised at the Hortek's sentimentality. "There are many dangers in space." "Yes," said Kube-McDowell. "And to the vagabond, we are one of them. Do you know, General, that no ship like this, no plan or design, appears in any registry of any New Republic world? No shipwright we've found will claim it as his handiwork, though all seem to admire the craft evident in it. If the vagabond was built by any species we know, no other like it was ever made." "Our catalog of everything that ever was is a long way from being complete," said Lando. "The odds favor a less exotic history." "How can a gambler post the odds without knowing the game?" scoffed Kube-McDowell. "Perhaps this ship before us is home to a species which has no other home. Perhaps it's a new and curious visitor to this part of the universe from places for which we have no names. Or perhaps it comes here from deep in the core, where we have vanishingly few friends. All are possible, as are a universe of possibilities beyond our present imagining." "Yes, possible," Lando admitted. "Not likely, but reason enough to be cautious, wouldn't you agree?" Kube-McDowell said pointedly. "Reason enough for patience, even to the point of pain, even to the point of boredom. We will watch them for a while, General. We'll let them watch us for a while as well. And I'll tell you when we're ready to do more." "Can you live with that, General?" Lando's skin prickled to hear echoes of his private conversations in Kube-McDowell's words. It seemed more than a coincidence, and yet he had, on many occasions, seen charlatans perform even more convincing feats of mind-reading through trickery. "For now, Colonel," Lando said, "I just hope whoever or whatever's inside that thing isn't busy making plans to destroy it to keep it out of our hands. That's part of your universe of possibilities, too. I hope you won't forget it." Kube-McDowell's expression was unreadable. "I will ask the communications officer to allot what slack time there may be in our holonet queue to your staff. Perhaps that will allow you to make faster progress." "Thank you, Colonel," Lando said with courtly politeness. "That'd be a step in the right direction." "What a mess," Lieutenant Norda Proy said, studying the high-resolution scan of space directly ahead of the Steadfast. The 3D display showed more than 12,000 objects, from hundreds no larger than a stormtrooper's combat boot, to one that promised to be the aft third of an Imperial Star Destroyer. "Must have been one wild party," Captain Ulas nodded. "We'll be here a month, at least. Where would you like to start, Lieutenant?" "The big piece of cake, of course," Proy said, pointing. "But we can launch droids on the way in, and let them start picking up the crumbs." For nearly a year, the fleet hauler Steadfast had traced a solitary course through some of the most famous regions of what had once been Imperial space. Known in fleet office slang as a junker, Steadfast had served in the Battle of Endor, in the defense of Coruscant against Admiral Thrawn, and in the pursuit of the Night Hammer. But with the cessation of hostilities, the 4 oldest fleet haulers had been recalled, at the request of the intelligence section, from the combat groups they usually served. Equipped with dozens of specialized droids and with intelligence officers supplementing the usual crew, The Junkers were reborn as scavengers. Their mission orders took them to the coordinates of major battles between the Empire and its enemies, where they searched through the wreckage for objects or information of potential value.
"Do you think we're the first ones here this time?"
asked Captain Ulas. Norda Proy studied the spectroscopic analysis of the objects being tracked.
"Just possibly so, Captain. I don't want to get my hopes up, though. We'll know pretty quickly when we board the wreck if the mice have been here before us."
Operation Flotsam had been launched when military artifacts, Rebel and Imperial, began showing up on the private collector's market. When further investigation showed that the artifacts had not been stolen, but had been salvaged from battle zones by smugglers and other entrepreneurs, the Senate acted with unusual speed and unanimity. The historic Battle Site Protection Act established more than 24 restricted areas and claimed ownership of all combat debris everywhere in the name of the Alliance War Museum. But security, not history, was the prime concern. Many observers credited the explosion of a thermal detonator in a wealthy residential zone on Given, and a Rudrig crime ring's use of an Imperial interrogator droid on a kidnapped victim, with putting the fear into the Senate. But a declaration of ownership by Coruscant only made the traffic in artifacts illegal. It didn't end it. That took gunship patrols through the restricted areas, the arrest of the notorious Huttese smuggler Uta, and the seizure of weapons and other exotic collectibles from the upper-class customers of a well-known Imperial City art dealer. Even at that, the arrival of Steadfast had twice sent would-be poachers running, and the debris fields it had surveyed so far had all seemed picked over.
"I have a positive identification on the wreck, Lieutenant,"
a junior intelligence officer called out.
"It's the I-class Star Destroyer Nissel, our registry number SD-489, reported destroyed by internal explosions during the Imperial evacuation of Narth and Ihopek. The report is from Alliance sources."
"All right," said Norda Proy, nodding.
"Let's move in."
First aboard the rack were half a dozen scanning and monitoring droids, which jetted across to it on their own power, while the Steadfast held station a safe distance away. Working in pairs so that anything that happened to one would be documented by the other, the droids fanned out according to a search plan tailored to that class of vessel. The priorities were live weapons, known booby traps, and other possible hazards to the living, breathing search teams that were ready to follow. The threats were not merely theoretical. The Junker Salonia had been badly damaged when a poacher's bomb disguised as a datapad went off in its hold. A year earlier, the ironically named Surveyor Foresight had been destroyed by auto-firing laser cannon when search teams tripped an alarm inside an abandoned Imperial cruiser. But one rule of thumb had never failed the scavengers. If the droids found bodies aboard, there would be no bombs. Imperial guile did not extend to using the bodies of their own as bait for their enemies, and poachers, out of superstition or respect, always cleared the corridors and compartments of corpses. Still, Norda Proy found that it made him uncomfortable to be gladdened by the sight of bodies aboard the Nissel.
"Did you hear about the fellow Republic security arrested on Dera 4 last month?"
Proy asked, studying the images being relayed to Steadfast by SM-6.
"He had 11 Imperial corpses in cryo-tanks in a hangar, all of them in full armor or deck uniform. Crazy."
"I heard," said Captain Ulas. "Crazy and sad. Apparently he was keeping them until his son was old enough to be told what happened to his mother during the occupation. Seems he planned to hand his son whatever weapon he wanted and let him take his revenge."
"I'm glad I had a normal father,"
Proy said, switching the display to the signal from SM-1. Captain Ulas sat back and folded his hands on his lap.
I'm glad my homeworld was never occupied by the Empire.
At that moment, SM-1 bumped against a floating body, sending it slowly cartwheeling away. But for just a moment, the face of a dead Imperial petty officer, burned by fire or explosion and blistered by decompression, seemed to hover in front of the droid's optical scanner.
"You know, Lieutenant,"
said Ulas,
"even a just war doesn't look quite so gloriously heroic to those of us who have to pick up afterward."
"I won't disagree," said Pry. "I'm glad it's over." The droid team of SM-3 and SM-4 found what was left of the power and propulsion decks of the Nissel. A jungle of scorched and twisted durasteel yawning open to space.
"The explosion was internal, all right,"
Norda Pry said, after studying the side-by-side images sent back by the droids.
"Looks like a failure of the primary transfer coupling for the solar ionization reactor, which is about as foolproof a piece of equipment as there is aboard a Star Destroyer."
"Sabotage?"
"Or plain bad luck,"
said Pry.
"Whatever happened, it dropped the hyperspace motivator right down the pipe into the reactor core. The secondary explosion broke her back and carried away just about everything below the 26th deck. Poor sods wouldn't have had any warning at all. Concussion alone probably killed almost everyone on the upper decks."
Pry switched to the signal from SM-5 and SM-6, which were slowly making their way to the bridge. "Ensign, what would the normal ship's complement be for the intact portion of the Nissel?"
"One moment, sir," said the rating, leaning over his console. "At battle stations, approximately 12,000. At normal watch stations, approximately 7,400.
"Too many to take home," said Ulas. Norda Pry shook his head.
"Chances are half the crew or more was comprised of conscripts, most of them from what are now New Republic worlds," he said. "I'll put in a request to have a fleet transport diverted here to take the overflow."
The primary operator for SM-1 sat beside data analysis droid DA-1 at a console in Steadfast's forward hold. Together they monitored in real time the steady stream of images and sensor data from inside Nissel. A few steps away sat the operator for SM-2 and his analysis droid, performing the same tasks in parallel. The primary task for the droids and their operators was to inventory the ship's hangars, which had been located forward of the reactor, and its gun batteries, which ordinarily bristled from every face of the wedge-shaped main hull. But enough of the ship was missing that task was well ahead of schedule. Both droids were already well aft in the sections below the Star Destroyer's superstructure. Nissel's hull was intact there, and the droids moved through the outer corridors on the port side without difficulty or obstruction. But when they turned down an inner corridor leading to the aft emplacements, alarms began sounding at both consoles. "Ambient light detected," DA-1 announced, but it was obvious to both operators without interpretation. The corridor ahead was brightly lit by its own overhead lights. Immediately the operator paged the Steadfast's bridge. "Lieutenant Pry, this is Maki on number 1. Sir, the lights are on in corridor R, level 90. There's still power aboard." The operator's voice was shadowed by concern.
"Interesting,"
said Ulas, glancing at the range marker on the navigation display.
"Redundant systems,"
Pry said, frowning, calling a 3-view plan of the ship to his display.
"That section is served by the number 4 power cell, backed up by the number 8. I guess one of them's still working. Give the imps credit, they built those babies to last."
"Should I have the helmsman put a little more distance between us and the wreck?"
Ulas's upper tentacles wrapped themselves protectively around his thin neck as he spoke, showing his nervousness.
"No,"
Pry said. He frowned, seemingly lost in thought.
"That's combat lighting, not emergency lighting. You know, As quickly as this ship went bad, there's a chance they didn't have time to initiate a purge. Marquis, you there?
Yes, sir.
Any signs of movement? Any vibration or hot spots in the bulkheads?
No, sir.
Then I want you to check something for me, he said. Send the droid up to level 96, corridor Q.
What's there?
Asked Ulas. Norda Pry shook his head.
Wait, I'm superstitious about wishing out loud.
With its twin following, SM-1 entered a turbolift shaft and began rising toward level 96. Ulas watched anxiously, while Pry watched with silent anticipation. When the first droid had cleared the shaft, they saw an abandoned guard post by a set of open blast doors. Thousands of jagged, glittery fragments drifted in the air like snow.
The viewports on this level must have imploded after the explosion, said Ulas.
No, too thin. Those are fragments from display screens, Pry said, which tells me we're in the right place. Marquis, turn to starboard. Forward now, through the blast doors. Look for an access corridor on the right, about 20 meters ahead.
The droid's maneuvering jets stirred the cloud of fragments into frantic motion as it made its way along, finding and turning down the access corridor. Before long, the corridor opened into a large, high-ceilinged room. More than 40 workstations, their displays all shattered, were arrayed in 2 half-circles. All faced the 2-meter-tall metallic cylinder that stood like an unfinished sculpture on a platform against the far wall. Hanging on the wall to either side of the cylinder were digital display panels as wide as the blast doors. An ever-changing array of multicolored messages in basic and binary filled most of the face of the left panel.
By my mother's jewels,
Pry said in awe.
What is it?
Our express ticket back to Coruscant,
said Lieutenant Norda Pry.
An intact Imperial memory core.
The No. 4 memory core from the Star Destroyer Nissel stood in a technical section laboratory coupled to 3 heavy-duty power droids in a cascade chain. One droid was sufficient to keep the core's tiers and channels from collapsing. The others were insurance. The contents of the memory core were too valuable to risk. Accessing the contents, though, required knowing which of more than 100 Imperial data sequencing algorithms had been used to write information to the core. And that knowledge was not stored anywhere in the core itself, but in the dual system controllers, which had not survived the destruction of the ship. Only 14 of those algorithms were known in detail to the experts of the technical section. In the first day the Nissel core was in the laboratory, all 14 were tried on it without success. The contents of the core poured out as seemingly impenetrable gibberish. 5 different teams made up of crack information scientist specialists, aided by speedy analysis droids, immediately set out to find the patterns in the gibberish. Using files captured from other Imperial vessels as a guide, they searched through the digital jigsaw puzzle for pieces that went together. Even a few short strings could be enough to allow the droids to recreate the unknown algorithm and unlock whatever secrets the memory core held. Jars Motempa's Team 3 assembled the first fragmentary string, made up of the names and ranks of 2 of Nissel's command officers. Within a day, Team 5 had found an even longer string containing a standard Imperial hypercom message header. The final breakthrough belonged to Motempa again, the complete 15-point standing maintenance order for a TIE bomber. Its more than 1,400 sequential data bits seemed to map every detail of the new algorithm. Confirmation came quickly. The first file reconstructed was the ship's duty roster. The second was its daily communications log for the day it was destroyed. After that, things moved very quickly. An interface droid was programmed with the new algorithm and linked to the Nissel core. And this time, tens of thousands of object and data files poured forth instead of gibberish.
Each file was copied, tagged, classified, and forwarded to the analysis section for distribution. One of them, given the ID number AK031995 and a priority code of Most Urgent, ended up in the hands of Idar Neelikirka. Officially, Idar Neelikirka was a cataloger, and his assignment was asset tracking. Practically, that meant he made lists, requested lists, collected lists, collated lists, cross-indexed lists. All of the lists concerned the same subject, Imperial warships. The Asset Tracking Office had been set up in the wake of an intelligence failure that had nearly led to disaster. Grand Admiral Thrawn had been the first to rediscover the more than 100 hidden Old Republic dreadnoughts known as the Katana Fleet, and had managed to seize the great majority of them before the New Republic caught up. Thrawn's vastly strengthened fleet then attacked more than 20 New Republic systems. By the time he was defeated, a great price had been paid in lives and material. Asset tracking existed to make sure that there were no more such painful surprises. But the office had undergone many changes since it had been established. At first, it enjoyed a staff of 15, 8 researchers, 3 catalogers, 2 analysts, and 2 clerical droids. The size of the staff reflected the importance given the task, and the chief analyst was invariably well connected in the fleet office. Reports from the Asset Tracking Office regularly received high-level attention. Over time, however, the office's star faded. The easy work was done early, and each report contained less new and useful information. The passage of time raised doubts about the usefulness of asset tracking assessments, since it gave potential enemies the chance to build and launch new vessels. Little by little, staff was reassigned to higher priority tasks, and the positions that remained came to be viewed as career dead ends. Those who could get out did, except for Idar Neelikirka. At the time the Nissel intelligence reached him, Idar Neelikirka was the Asset Tracking Office. Starting out as a researcher, he had moved up to cataloger when no one else had seemed to want the job, and had added the analyst's hat when the office's last licensed analyst had been reassigned. For more than 7 years he had carried the burden alone. He had the smallest cubicle in the threat assessment section, no more than a box with a door. To go with the absence of creature comforts, he also had no staff, no status or perks, and no contacts to tell him where file AK031995 had come from. Idar Neelikirka did not know about the evacuation of Narth and Dipotech, the destruction of the Nissel, or the discoveries of the Steadfast. He had never heard of Captain Ulas, Norda Proy, Jars Motempa, or any of the others whose work had brought the file to him. He was not aware that outside his cubicle walls he was considered laughably humorless and harmlessly obsessive. But he knew his job, which had not changed since the office had been established, to inventory and determine the status of every warship known to the New Republic and not under the control of the New Republic. And he knew that in the entire history of the Asset Tracking Office it had never before had available to it what he now had before him, a complete Imperial order of battle. It was all there. Every warship, by name, class, call sign, and commander, assigned to every fleet and combat command. Every fighter, interceptor, bomber, and assault squadron posted to every SD, SSD, carrier, and dreadnought, with squadron strengths detailed. Every stormtrooper company and infantry battalion assigned to every transport, occupation force, outpost, and fort. Every cripple in a dry dock and every keel in a shipyard, with projected repair and completion dates. Even the second-tier vessels allocated to training commands were included. The date stamp on the file was more than 10 years old, but it was still a treasure beyond price. The order of battle encompassed information far beyond that which ordinary ship captains and task force commanders would have at their disposal. Information that only a ranking sector commander or the Emperor's own military aides would possess. And that made Idar Nilikirka suspicious. Suspicious enough to spend the next several hours trying to show that the file was a fraud, a leak-discovered Imperial disinformation trick. When he could not do so, he called his wives and told them not to expect him that night. Then he threw himself into the real task before him, finding something in AK-031995 to justify the last 7 years of his professional life, something to remind everyone in the Fleet Command that the Asset Tracking Office existed for a reason. Having authenticated the order of battle with his highest confidence intelligence, he'd put his faith behind it, certain that he would never have such an opportunity again. As he studied the data, the unofficial motto of the intelligence section lingered in his mind.
As dangerous as what we don't know are the things we know that aren't so.
Idar Nilikirka did not leave his desk for 3 days. When at last he did, it was not to go home. With his datapad tucked tightly under his arm, he ordered an airspeeder from the pool and headed for Victory Lake. The Coruscant home of Admiral Akbar was made up of 2 squat off-white cylinders. One cylinder, windowless, rose from the grassy shore of Victory Lake. The other, half transparisteel, rose from the tranquil blue water. They were linked by a third cylinder, a long, slender shape that enclosed a second-story skywalk. A graceful single-seat calamari water skimmer was moored to a pylon in the lake. Idar's fleet ID was enough to get him past the guard post at the security perimeter, though he was obliged to surrender his datapad for screening, then park the airspeeder and walk up to the house. There he presented himself at the entrance to the lakeshore cylinder.
Idar Nilikirka, Chief Analyst of the Asset Tracking Office, Intelligence Section, Fleet Command, to see Admiral Akbar.
A few seconds later, the curved door flashed open with a hiss to reveal a fleet valet droid. Folding its arms across its chest, it seemed to take up the whole doorway. Analyst. Admiral Akbar doesn't see anyone below the rank of Commodore when he's home, the droid said. He spends enough time out of water as it is. Call his office in the morning and ask for an appointment. Idar stared disbelievingly.
You don't understand. This is important.
Then it's important enough to disturb your immediate superior first, the droid said. Run it up through channels. The Admiral will consider it if and when it reaches his desk.
No,
Idar said stubbornly. He tried to look beyond the droid into the house, but all he saw was the inner door of the security lock.
Not acceptable. I have to see him personally. I can't take the chance that this information won't be brought to his attention.
Mr. Nilikirka, Admiral Akbar is resting. He is not available to see you, the droid said implacably. Now, will you leave, or do I need to signal the guard? Hugging the datapad to his chest, Idar squinted angrily at the droid.
Very well,
he said finally.
I'll go.
Thank you, Mr. Nilikirka, said the droid. It waited until Idar had turned and taken his first steps down the path before closing the door. The moment the door closed, however, Idar wheeled around on the path and ran past the entrance toward the shore. Gritting his teeth and cringing, he waded clumsily out into the water, splashing wildly. Alarms began to sound, and a brilliant bank of lights on the underside of the skywalk suddenly cut short the twilight. With an animal cry, Idar flung himself headlong into the waist-deep water and began to thrash his way toward the lake cylinder in a wretched imitation of swimming. His simple and single-minded impulse had been to pound on the lake-level viewpanes to get Akbar's attention.
But as he got closer, he saw that the cylinder was an aquahab, filled with water nearly to the level of the skywalk. A security airspeeder swooped low overhead, and an amplified voice bellowed orders at him. "Attention, intruder! This is your only warning. You are trespassing on government property. Anti-personnel blasters are aimed at you. Stop where you are and you will not be fired on. If you do not surrender, you will be shot." Panicked, Idar raised his arms. When he did, his fragile grasp of swimming abruptly ended and he slid below the surface. Before he realized what was happening, he found himself mired hand and foot in a layer of muck on the bottom, unable to push off and free himself to return to the surface. A ring of lamps around the base of the aquahab flooded the dark waters with light. For the first time, Idar could see that there was an underwater entrance to the cylinder. He fought his way along the bottom to it, reached up with his free hand and squeezed the open lever. Nothing happened. In final desperation, with the sound of a jet boat's engines surrounding him and quickly growing louder, Idar reached up and swung the data pad against the hatch. It seemed to move in slow motion and to make hardly any sound when it struck. But to Idar's surprise, the hatch slid open. A blur in the water grasped him firmly by the front of his shirt and dragged him inside with an ease that spoke of impressive strength. Moments later, Idar found himself breaking the surface at the top of the aquahab. Gasping noisily, he grabbed wildly for the edge. Only when his fingertips had found precarious purchase there did Idar realize that he no longer had the data pad. He looked around wildly and found Admiral Akbar watching him. The calamari glided easily through the water on the far side of the pool, making barely a ripple. "You are Tamarian, are you not?" Akbar said. Idar was shaking uncontrollably as he clung to the edge of the walkway surrounding the water.
"Yes, Admiral."
"I have heard that Tamar has an unusually thin atmosphere for an inhabited world," said Akbar casually.
"That is true, Admiral."
"I have heard," the Admiral went on, "that as a consequence, your people evolved a sort of chemical pouch where you store oxygen while at rest."
"Yes,"
Idar said through chattering lips.
"The Chagistorm. It allows us to expend energy faster for a short time than respiration alone would allow."
"I am told," said Akbar, "that this is why your people can free live in vacuum for short periods of time." Feeling nauseous, Idar closed his eyes and rested his head on his arms. "Yes," he said, his voice small and muffled. "I have also heard," said the calamari, gliding nearby, "that your planet is wholly without surface water, and that your people's most powerful fears have come to involve being immersed in standing water." Idar nodded weakly. "I confess that such fears are completely alien to me," said Akbar. "Yet you willingly entered the lake in an effort to see me."
Yes, Admiral. I thought it was my duty."
Effortlessly, the big calamari eased himself out of the water and onto the ledge. Idar saw that he held the datapad securely in one big hand. "Well," Akbar said, extending his empty hand to Idar, "I find I am not resting any longer. So, perhaps you will come to my study with me and tell me what news has inspired such reckless devotion to duty." The track outside the officers' gymnasium at Fleet Headquarters wound its way for a kilometer over hilly, wooded ground. Secured, shielded, and privacy-screened, It had been used many times for discreet, deniable meetings, not least by the man for whom Admiral Akbar waited in the cool morning air. Akbar stood at the edge of the line of trees, a few strides from the cinder track, and looked back toward the rising sun as a solitary runner crested a small rise. As the runner drew near, Akbar stepped out from the trees. "I see you are still a creature of habit, Hiram," he said with cheerful gruffness. Admiral Hiram Drayson slowed from his brisk jog to a walk. "I see you're still as slothful as ever. It's been a long time since you've been in the gym." "I do not much enjoy coming here, but sometimes I have no choice," Akbar said, falling in beside Jason. "Will you take pity and walk with me a while?" "I think I can accommodate myself to your pace," said Jason. "What's new?" "I had a visit last night from the senior analyst of asset tracking," said Akbar. "Indeed. So, you have already heard?" "I heard there was a disturbance at your residence, nothing more." "I will choose to believe that," Akbar said. "Idar has uncovered something which concerns me, and about which I would like your counsel. But I did not want to be seen coming to your office, or allow this to be placed on the fleet net." "Go on." Even at their modest pace, Akbar was beginning to pant. "Idar has been studying the Imperial Order of Battle taken from the Nissel a month ago. He has found a discrepancy." "Another katana?" "Nothing so large or clear-cut," Akbar said. "What the young man has discovered is this. There are an unusual number of vessels assigned to the Empire's Black Sword Command, which we cannot account for." "Black Sword Command defended the center of the Empire's rim territories," Drayson noted. "Praxis, Corridon, the entire Kokosh and Farlax sectors." "Yes," Akbar said, nearly gasping for breath. He placed a hand on Drayson's shoulder and turned him. "Please, may we stop?" "Of course." "Thank you," said Akbar, his neck and upper chest heaving. "I apologize. The older I get, the harder it is for me to keep my lungs wet in air." "Apology not necessary. You were saying—" "Yes, of course." Akbar glanced up and down the track, then dropped his voice. "According to Idar, the order of battle for Black Sword includes 44 capital ships, which we have not seen nor heard of since the fall of the Emperor. None smaller than a Victory-class Star Destroyer. 3 are super-class vessels." Drayson whistled. "What do you think of his analysis?" "I find it indisputable." "You know that that's more than enough firepower to overwhelm any planetary system in the New Republic," said Drayson. "Coruscant included." "Yes," said Akbar. "If those ships still exist, they would represent a serious threat." "If?" "If," Akbar repeated. "You see, there are many wrinkles to this matter. All but 5 of the 44 were either newly laid keels or in a yard somewhere for refit or major repairs." "Which yards?" "Idar cannot say. The names given are either not known to us or are unknown code names for places we do know." "Or they may not exist at all. The yards or the ships," said Drayson. "Don't rule out the possibility that the order of battle is padded with paper assets. If neither Dala nor Thrawn could lay hands on these ships to throw at us." "That is a consideration." Drayson frowned. "What are the chances that some or all of them were simply renamed, and we have seen them since? We've certainly known Imperial Command to play that game." "Idar tells me that, at most, that could account for 5 of the missing vessels." "Which would still leave a substantial force unaccounted for," mused Drayson. "How long after the destruction of the Nissel did the Black Sword Command withdraw from the Rim?" "Less than a year." "Long enough for at least some of those vessels to have been completed or repaired," said Drayson. "More than half.
if the projected commissioning dates and the order of battle were met. So the Empire may have taken upwards of 20 more ships than we knew back with them to the deep core. Yes, but there's another possibility, which concerns me rather more, said Akbar. The Empire preferred to establish military shipyards in every sector they controlled, so that no one facility was critical to the war effort, and damaged ships did not need to travel far for repairs. Which would suggest that those unidentified yards were likely located somewhere in Black Sword Command's patrol area. Which would mean that as many as 20 Star Destroyers could be very much closer to us than the core. Drayson squinted at Akbar. Ordinarily, I'd expect the Empire to destroy any assets they couldn't take with them. I would be happy to know that they had done so, said Akbar. But we haven't found any ruined shipyards in that area, though that is not conclusive. There are large areas of Kokosh and Farlax which have never been properly surveyed, including the Morath Nebula and the Kurnock cluster. Ah, said Drayson. I see where this is leading. Hiram, I don't want to know how you might know the answers, but I know you have resources not available outside your office. I am concerned by this business with Nil Spar. Negotiations have been at a standstill for weeks, and yet Leia still urges patience. And I wonder to myself, could the Yavitha be hiding these ships for Dala? Is it possible the Duskan League is still allied with the core? After a moment's measured consideration, Drayson said, I have no information to support such a thesis, or to rule it out. Then I am at a loss as to how to proceed, Akbar said. The negotiations in progress make this a delicate matter. I cannot make accusations without evidence, nor can I ignore a potential threat of this magnitude. What would you do if the decision were yours? I would begin a search for this Black Fleet, and not stop until we have found it, or its wreckage, and made certain it is not sitting on our doorstep. We must know the fate of these ships. Drayson nodded thoughtfully. Then I think you should take Idar's information to Princess Leia, and make that recommendation. Perhaps she'll allow you to persuade her. I fear otherwise, said Akbar. Still, I can but try. I wish you success. In the meantime, can you see your way to... Akbar pressed a data card into Drayson's hand. The list of the missing ships and the mystery shipyards. 2 other runners were in sight now and drawing nearer. With a perfectly practiced casualness, Drayson made the data card disappear into a pocket. I'll do what I can, he said, and flashed a stage smile. Nice seeing you again, Admiral. At the pace at which Drayson then struck out down the track, Akbar doubted that any other runner would head him.